Shelter is a game about parenthood. The player controls a mother badger in the wild, tasked with caring for her newborn badger cubs. Genre-wise, it is an action-adventure with a focus on stealth gameplay. The player must maintain a steady supply of food for each of their young, whilst navigating a number of distinct levels. Shelter is a short and finely constructed journey through the North American wilderness. Shelter has a wonderful art style. The world is built up of visuals reminiscent of papercraft, angular and sharp, though not to the extent of a game like Tearaway. Colours are used effectively, and each level uses colour in its own personal way, which creates an appealing visual difference between each area. For example, the level with the forest fire arises as a harsh juxtaposition to prior areas, where the bright red of an approaching flame brings urgency to the player's rush between patches of grass. Shelter has a very minimalistic HUD as well. Besides a few picture control prompts in the first few minutes of play, no overlay is used during gameplay. All important gameplay elements are shown through visual or audio cues. The game also features a fantastic soundtrack. Folksy guitars and understated percussion fit well against the backdrop of the wilderness. It also matches the visual direction well. Sound effects are well placed, with food having a hearty plop when you pass it to one of your young, and the deep swoosh of a diving eagle enemy inspiring panic. The eagle's theme of sorts also lends itself well to the same sense of dread. In terms of plot, the game begins with a mother badger foraging for food for her newborn badger cubs. Before long, they leave their safe earthy shelter in order to find more food. As the first area concludes, the family has thoroughly strayed from the path back to their home and must move out in search of a new shelter to call their own. The game features very little text, and the story can be inferred by the player easily due to the audio-visual cues alone. Throughout the game, the player forms a huge emotional connection to the cubs and keeping them safe. There are a number of small details which add into this desire to protect. There is one button which controls the bulk of the player actions throughout the game, and when no other contextual action is appropriate, this button makes the mother badger bark, which the cubs echo back. This is a good audible notifier of how many cubs are following behind as they each yip back one after the other, and it is also very cute. The cubs themselves are quite adorable, and each has its own distinct markings. Lastly, the children slowly seem to grow larger throughout the journey, though I can't tell exactly whether this is just my mind playing tricks. Each of these cues is subtle, but it is very effective. Cubs follow the mother, but will still act on their own, such as when they see food or when they get scared by a loud noise. It gives them more personality than mere escorts through the levels. The game begins with 5 cubs in the player's care. Through accidents and confrontations with predators, the number of children decrease. Cubs can be lost throughout the game, whether through natural disasters such as water rapids, straying too far from the mother, or from predators. While it is possible to complete the game without losing a single child, it is more or less expected that the player will lose at least one. The cubs act somewhat like lives, where you begin the game with a finite number, but as you lose them, rather than forcing a loss state, the toll is on the player's own emotions. Each cub becomes more grey the hungrier they are. This is a subtle way of inflicting a time limit to literally losing a life, as the player can see their baby slowly starving through visual cues. Luckily, the most hungry cub will usually be the most eager to eat from found food, so one rarely has to worry about one cub hoarding all the snacks. Each loss is felt strongly, however, often following a desperate surveying of the area surrounding where they disappeared. These moments of losing a child you've cared for throughout the game are immensely powerful, and you feel a real sense of loss if it happens. The sudden nature of the disappearances makes this even more heartbreaking. One moment you're crossing a stream with the full litter, then as you turn around and count your young, you notice one is missing, and that it must have been washed down the rapids or been ripped away by the eagle. It's incredibly upsetting. Arguably, the most dangerous obstacle in the player's way is the eagle. The eagle is first introduced with a loud squawk from above, before swooping down across the nearby landscape. This is repeated a number of times throughout the game. The eagle is mostly seen through its enormous shadow moving across the landscape. If the player enters the shadow, the eagle will swoop and attempt to claim a badger. This lack of vision of the enemy creates a very strong feeling of unease, as the player never gets a good look at the creature that can take their young away. The moments with the eagle are the most tense in the game, as a failure made in its presence represents a near guaranteed loss of a child. As a result of the eagle and other predators in the badger family's path, stealth becomes the game's focus, where the badgers must duck between patches of overgrowth in order to hide. Much of the game revolves around herding your young through thick undergrowth in an attempt to avoid the threat of the predators. I'm going to be talking about the ending of the game now, so major spoilers are imminent. You have been warned. Shelter's ending is what elevates it in my eyes to something incredible. Both the final segment of gameplay and the short scene in the epilogue. In the final level, the player eventually comes to an area which leads them out through patches of grass to an open field, with safe-looking scenery across from a large expanse of unsafe terrain. Making matters worse, an eagle has been following along after the badger family as they made their way across this field. When the player comes to a dead end, they must make a choice. It is unlikely that the true path had been missed, as the game acknowledges the progress being made across the field, with the eagle following along above. It is likely that the player will decide that their only option is to try to make a break for it across the field for the nearest patch of cover. Making this segment interactive was a stroke of genius. It forces the player to make a decision, unsure if they're making the right one. The scenery in the distance is too tempting, particularly as it's away from the threat of the eagle. And so the mother badger leads her litter out across the open field. At first there is no sound besides the patter of the badger's feet. Then the eagle squawks in the distance, then louder and closer. The shadow falls over the mother badger and it gets buffeted by the eagle. Crippled, the player pushes the mother to cross the field, nearer to the safety than before. The cubs rush about while this is happening before the eagle finally swoops a third time and picks up the now limp mother badger. The game cuts to a scene of the remaining badgers, as many as the player managed to protect throughout their journey, waddling to apparent safety in the area past the open field. The now grown-up badgers move on. The mother badger may have died, but in her time with her children, she protected them as best she could and prepared them for the cycle to repeat. And so the game ends, with the mother badger sending her children out into the world, left to fend for themselves as best they can. And then comes the perfect conclusion following the already powerful ending. It's a very short clip, so I will just play it. This tiny clip puts the entire journey into perspective. The eagle, which warrants so much fear throughout the game, and the final boss of sorts for the mother badger, as well as her killer, is just a parent caring for her own children. Much like the mother badger, the eagle was focused entirely on looking after its own young. This scene paints the greatest enemy in the game in a new light and makes one reflect on that parenthood theme once again. The change of perspective makes one reflect upon the feelings that losing a child as the mother badger felt, and beyond that even when losing a child to the big bad eagle, that was purely because another parent was only trying to feed its own young. Shelter is one of the most beautiful games I've ever played. I haven't come across a video game with a more concise display of the theme of parenthood as Shelter. It is driven in its focus, and every aspect of the game ties into the realization of this theme. The developers did an exceptional job in creating such a moving adventure, starring a family of badgers no less. It is a work of art in my eyes, and so I heartily recommend playing it.